We have with us Jeff Lance. He's a key account manager at LinkedIn Sales Solutions, financial services vertical, covering some of the division's largest accounts, such as JP Morgan Chase and Fidelity. His focus is to make sure clients get most value out of Sales Navigator and Sales Insights, but he also consults on how to leverage LinkedIn to network, build trust, and build your personal brand. Along with him, we have Alex Luxembourg. He is a client partner at Meta, where he focuses on large financial services clients. Before joining Meta, he held personal business development roles at American Express, Twitter, and B2B retail marketplace called Intern. He is a member of the boards of Amit and North Shore Hebrew Academy. Our event will be moderated by Jillian Little. Jillian's an associate with us at Grant Thornton. She began her career as a paralegal and then decided to switch careers and go into accounting. Kudos to you. and with that, I will quickly hand over to Stanley Goldstein, who is here. Stanley's the founder of the Roundtable. We'd love to say, have him say a few words, and then we'll hand it over to Jillian from that point. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yes, I am the founder. Nice to see a big crowd here, because in the first year, the average attendance was 9 people. For those who follow baseball, that's what we need for a team, 9 people. Alex has a good background, not the least of which is he worked for American Express. Great firm. They had great foresight. They bought my accounting firm 25 years ago. So they're very, very helpful to me.
I love the deal.
Love the deal. Briefly, the reason you're here is the Roundtable is a professional organization, and we try to encourage education, best practices, and ethics in the money management field. We've done a pretty good job. And the education is panels like tonight. People walk out smarter, and every once in a while you meet somebody who you make a lifelong friend. That's not a bad thing. So enjoy tonight, and thank you, Grant Thornton and Kudgeon, for hosting the whole thing.
Jillian, take it over.
So to jump back in, I know Kunjin gave us a little bit of the background of your careers. If you guys could maybe just share with us some of the highlights of maybe some of the factors that brought you to this point, and maybe more specifically some of the things that you worked on related to branding.
Sure.
Yeah, Jeff, take it away.
So I actually started as a financial advisor, and was in upstate New York and decided to move down to New York City, where I found the wonderful industry of recruiting. So I never thought I would be a recruiter coming out of college, but it was a great experience for me to start meeting a lot of people, having discussions with individuals that I typically wouldn't have, because it was very technical recruiting that I was doing within engineering, and then leveraging that experience to get into technology in 2011 for LinkedIn. So that was a big move for me. I was really excited to get into technology. It was a great space for me at that time because I had a recruiting background, and I was moving into LinkedIn when it was pretty much just a recruiting tool upon networking. And from there, that's really where I started to understand personal branding and where the profile becomes, the building block. So that's really, I think, the start of my career in social media, and really where I understand that kind of my building block is my profile, and that's what's going to be out there for the world to see.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. I can just hold this guy. My name is Alex Luxembourg. I am a client partner at Meta, which is the company that owns Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp, Oculus, some other things that no one's ever heard of. I started my real career at American Express in a joint venture with a company called Bon Privé, which was an e-commerce company. I was on the Amex side. We were trying to bring this brand into the US, and it was very difficult, and it did not last very long. I then, before the company fell apart, I ended up going over to Twitter, where I was an account manager focused on financial services. and I spent some time at Twitter. My dad didn't understand this at all, by the way. He said, what are you leaving American Express to go to like this ridiculous social media company? We ended up going public 6 months later. Like, stick it to your dad. My father's a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. So, just another. So I ended up spending a lot of time at Twitter and spent some time rising up there in ad sales. And then got an itch to go to a startup. I worked at a B2B retail marketplace, and we can get into what that means another time. I realized I was not a small company person, and I ended up going to Facebook, which is now Meta, to sell ads to large insurance companies. The funny part there is that we raised our B round at the startup from Eduardo Saverin, who was one of Mark Zuckerberg's good friends in that movie, who gave him the additional money. And then I left like 6 weeks later to go to Facebook. I don't think he got that money at all. So that's my story. I really grew up in social media in my career. A lot of what we do when we're talking to our partners in advertising is how they brand themselves. And I've applied a lot of those best practices to myself in my career and how I develop a brand on social media, but also how do I kind of leverage that to jump off the page into real life as well. And we can talk about some of that today.
Thank you. And then, so given some of the experiences that you guys just talked about, what kind of practical advice would you have for young professionals that are just kind of getting in the game?
I would say you probably have more experience than you think you have. When you're building out your profile, there's probably a lot that you've done in your career or in school or any kind of volunteering or groups that you're in that can really translate into the business world and into networking. So that's something that you should think about when you're building out your profile on LinkedIn. One of the things that the data tells us too is if you have a full profile, with your picture and your story, your experience, you're going to have 40 times the amount of engagement on LinkedIn if you just had kind of a skeleton profile. So that would probably be the best advice I have is just think about your experiences that you've had, even if you have a little time in the workplace, that can translate into the business world.
For me, it's really about authenticity. You have to be yourself on these platforms, and don't post pictures of yourself doing illegal activities. If that's yourself, but you should be yourself. And I think that the folks that use these platforms in a professional way, and all they do is kind of spit out their corporate communications that their PR team or the company that they're working on gives them. You're not going to gain any of your own individual brand by doing that. Put your own spin on it. Take your life experiences, add even a sentence on your perspective of what you're posting. Don't just kind of take that PR newswire link and put it out there. Some really practical advice is don't bash your competitors. It doesn't work. No one cares. You're not Elon Musk. It's just going to come back to haunt you, and 6 months from now, you might be applying for a job there. So I wouldn't do that. I don't know if this is where the data says, but I'd be curious to know. I think putting your GPA, this is like really specific, but putting your GPA in your LinkedIn profile makes no sense to me. Anything less than a 4.0 is imperfect. So what are you telling me by putting, I got a 3.4 within my accounting major? It's like, okay, so you have some good classes, bad classes, we all did. I don't really get why people did it. I don't even have my GPA on my resume. I have never had it on my resume. So I think those are the big things. And I guess the one of the things we spoke about when we were preparing for tonight is the different platforms you have access to, right? Jeff works on LinkedIn, I work at Facebook and Instagram. You can use all three of those things to build your brand professionally, but you might have different audiences on each one of those platforms. And be cognizant of who your audience is in each place, because it'll change. If your Instagram account is private like mine is, and the only people following me are family and friends, and they don't really want to hear my grandstanding, right? Like they're just gonna laugh at me. But on LinkedIn, where I work at a fancy company, I can write whatever I want. No, I'm kidding. My wife's not gonna see it. So I think like that's part of it as well, is knowing who your audience is and making sure that you're tailoring your message to who you perceive your audience to be on that platform.
I think Alex made a really interesting point about the different mediums and the different apps that are available. do you think, in more of a broad sense, is there any kind of methodology to how often you should post, what you should be posting, and how frequently, I guess, to be posting?
It's one of the key points. I think consistency on the platforms is something that's extremely important. There is data on LinkedIn that says Tuesdays and Thursdays are the best days to post. Yeah, it's usually the lull after lunch around 2 o'clock is a good time to post. There's actually some data around interacting with the C-suite on Sundays as they're getting ready for their week. So you got to test it out. There's always beta tests that you can do when you're posting your content out there. But the main message is consistency. Make sure you're doing it 1 to 3 times a week, and you're kind of mixing up the type of content that you're putting out there. It could be some business, could be some personal, kind of related to business, could be some trade. So, but the consistency is the key.
Yeah, I think that this is something we advise our brands on as well, even Fortune 500 companies. If you're struggling, if you want to be active on social media and you want to have a presence and you want to publish, but you're struggling with what to say, you can make a content calendar for yourself, right? You can say on Tuesdays I'm going to post about one specific aspect of my business. On Wednesdays I'm going to post thought leadership about another industry I'm interested in. On Thursdays I'm going to post about my kids. Or like personal life experiences or whatever else it is. You can kind of build it out that way. You can also reflect on what the actual surface that you're posting on is meant to be used for. If you use Instagram stories, you can post multiple times a day and it's not going to feel intrusive to your followers because that's how it's supposed to be used. If you post every single day on Facebook, you might seem tone deaf and you're not going to get as many likes as you might want. For me, that it's interesting in my personal experience using LinkedIn, and I'm curious to gain your perspective, Jeff. It's like I post when I really have something to say, and if I feel like I have something to say, those posts get engagements. The times that I kind of force myself to post, I think like my audience reacts to that, and they're like, okay, like not as interesting as those other posts. And I've had some posts that have really like gained steam. That has encouraged me to be more thoughtful.
I think there's a progression too of how comfortable you are, especially with young professionals. If you're not comfortable creating your own content, you can start off with a like or a comment on someone else's content. If you get comfortable sharing some other mediums content, that's also a great way to start. And then when you feel really comfortable and you want to produce your own content, you just got to make sure that it's worthwhile for the people to see on your network. So yeah, I mean, I want to make sure that I'm putting out content that's going to be valuable. One of the things that I always notice too is if I'm doing some sort of client engagement and there's a picture involved, that's where you're going to get the most engagement. You get a lot of likes, get a lot of comments. So that's something that you can leverage too if you're in a customer meeting, an event like this, and you can tag some people, you can get some really great engagement on it as well.
Yeah, I second that. Pictures are king. I think posting just a link or some words to any surface gets the most engagement. So, or video, depending on where you are.
So we talked about using the authenticity and consistency to kind of start building those relationships. Once you make a connection, whether it be on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever app it's on, how do you begin to start to leverage that into a relationship that has some kind of payoff that is actually meaningful and beneficial?
You have to be patient. I think that a lot of people in social media are expecting instant gratification in everything that they do. So I'm going to post it and I'm going to get a like, but that's not how real relationships work. It's okay for things to take time. If you meet someone at an event like this who's been in your industry for twice as long as you've been alive, they've been working at this for a long time, and you don't need to be best friends with them overnight, right? And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because the goal of the relationship isn't to talk to them as often as possible. The goal of the relationship is to either gain their perspective or have them help you out. There's an interesting distinction that a lot of people are making now between a sponsor and a mentor. Has anyone heard that distinction before? A mentor is someone who's going to basically listen to you talk and give you guidance. A sponsor is someone who's going to move the chess pieces on the board for you in order to get you to your next point in your career. And so be really thoughtful about what you want from the relationship with the person that you're engaging with. there's someone in my career, in my life now, who I speak to all the time. I'm in my 30s. He's nearly 70. He had an incredible career in my industry. CEO of a very large company, and it used to be he and I would speak every 18 months. I would have to email his assistant. I would get time. I would sweat. I was nervous, and now we're text. He texts me sometimes first, but that took like literally 10 years, and that our relationship is much more fruitful now. So I think like for this audience, you know, kind of networking event, it's our young professional event. It's like be patient, reach out when it's relevant. Don't just worry. Don't worry about in advertising. Talk about frequency and reach. Don't worry about frequency yet when you're still building a relationship. Like you don't have to speak to the person every day. You're not dating them. But have the goal in mind that over time you want to build your trust. Send them an article that you think they might be interested in. Like their comments, support them. I think like people think sometimes that they're an executive, they don't want the like, or they don't need the support, or they don't want the encouragement for a job well done. But I don't think that's true. I think everybody at every stage of their career appreciates positive feedback and positive reinforcement. So you can always start that. I love that idea of like starting.
Yeah, I think there's two things, and just in networking in general. It should always be a two-way street. So if there's value that you can add in any way to that person that you're connecting with, then you can do that as soon as possible. If you're just relying on another person to add value to you, then you should be patient. But you should also think about networking on social apps or social media, just as in real life. You know, if you got somebody's phone number at an event, you're not going to text them as soon as you leave, right? Or you're not going to keep calling them. You're going to freak them out a little bit. So social media is very similar, where you pick the times where you can engage. It could be likes, it could be comments, it could be tagging them in the post that's relevant to them. It could be sharing articles within their trade or their industry. So I think that's a great thing about social media and LinkedIn. If you see someone who's a peer or a mentor, they're going to be putting out information. And if it's relevant to you, then you can engage on it. If you have information that you can send to them or that you can post, it might be relevant for them. So always think of the two-way street. And that social media is not that much different than real life.
Yes, I learned that lesson a while ago. The CEO of that first joint venture that I mentioned, the Annex company, he helped me a lot in my career, got me the job at Twitter. And I would reach out to him every once in a while to stay in touch. And then he came up with a book. And he sent me an email. It's the first time he ever reached out to me first. And he was like, okay, now it's your turn to help me. I'm launching this book, and I need you to just help spread the good word. And like that, I realized like every author needs an audience, right? He needed me and my friends. I was the person he was talking to with this book. It's called Career Manifesto, by the way. It's really good. And that's me doing my job. And now the book took off without me. But it was interesting to see him in that light, right? And realize that he needed because that author needed his audience.
Now, we talked a little bit about the frequency, and we talked about not being overbearing and showing that you could add value. When it is time to reach out, do you guys think that there is one medium, be it phone calls or email or through the apps themselves? Do you think that there's one that's more effective than others, or etiquette-wise that should be given preferential treatment?
I think it's probably different for every relationship that you have. If you have someone's phone number and you're at that level with someone, you can text or you can call. Email is obviously a good way. That's a little bit more indirect. I'm in sales, so when I think about trying to engage a prospect or a customer, I go back to the rule of 7, where it has to be 7 connects with somebody. So it could be a phone call, an email through LinkedIn, Facebook Messenger, or whatever way that you get in touch with that person without being overbearing, but making sure that you're hitting them in areas that they're comfortable to respond. And again, I think it depends on the type of relationship that you have, but email for me is a great way if you don't know the person, because it goes right to their email address and to their LinkedIn account, and they know who's reaching out to them, right? Because you have your profile behind it. So it's an effective way if you're unable to get that phone call, especially now when most people aren't at their office lines. So it's a great way to get directly to them.
Has anyone ever written an email, a really formal email to someone, and then they get a response that's like one line? They spent like 3 days writing the email and proofreading it, and they wrote, sure, like without any punctuation. I hate that. So the lesson there is that know the medium, right? If you're gonna message me, if you're gonna DM me on Instagram, then just like don't write a formal letter. I'm not gonna respond that way. Right? And I even think emails becoming a little bit less formal these days as well. And so I think it feels more genuine, that authenticity, if you try to like be genuine and not be said. I don't know, I worked in the tech industry and I really grew up in it, and this is me being dressed up. So wearing jeans. So I think it's, maybe I'm wrong, and I have brothers that work at a brother that works at a hedge fund, and a brother who's a lawyer, a brother-in-law who's a lawyer, and they tell me I don't get it all the time. But I think that try to speak the language and write in the format and know your audience in the same way when you're reaching out to. I think that goes a long way, and I think you can be seen as someone who's really human and not just like another kid trying to get another job. That tends to go a long way too.
I also think a good rule of thumb that we teach most of our clients with emails, and it can really happen with any medium, especially here in New York City where people are just on their phones most of the time, traveling, commuting. Make sure your message can fit in that little phone. Because if you got to keep scrolling with your thumb, you're not going to finish that message. So, you should never have a meeting per se through your messages. You should try to get to that meeting through these different mediums.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So kind of piggybacking off of that, given that, as you mentioned, people aren't really back in the office yet, and that so much networking is done digitally, could you guys elaborate a little bit on some of the challenges that the focus on digital networking brings, and maybe how young professionals can work to combat those?
I'm not sure. I think it's a pretty sharp double-edged sword. On the one hand, people are, we're in this weird transition now, but more or less people are home and they're happy to have a meeting. But because they're staring at you on the screen and they're not coming and going and grabbing a coffee and getting online, it becomes super tactical. So I think that's like a hard balance, right? Like, okay, at the time, they want to know exactly what you want to talk about. You don't always know exactly what you want to talk about. So I think coming prepared, the conversation doesn't always have to go exactly as planned, but having enough, as salespeople, we're used to carrying a conversation, right? Like a client can stand there just staring at you for an hour. But, never, that doesn't happen to me. But come prepared to fill the time, but don't rely on that, right? So come prepared with notes, come prepared with bullet points, especially if someone that you want to gain something from. I think that's even more true in a digital world. I think if you're meeting someone in their office or you're meeting someone for coffee, there's just enough distraction to fill the dead air. But when you're meeting someone on Zoom or on a phone call, that doesn't exist. You kind of have to be prepared to fill that time, which I think is the biggest challenge. But I think it's easier to get people now because they're around, they're home. You're just another meeting on their screen, as opposed to having to come up to the 35th floor of a fancy office building and get all the barriers that requires. So.
I think digital transformation was on every company's agenda.
Right.
But it was definitely accelerated in the last couple of years. So I do think the young professionals are in a really good spot because they're used to using technology to market themselves, to get meetings. There's so much information out there right now that you can go into a sales call, consulting, tax, finance, whatever it is, you can understand your prospect and customer really well before you have their conversation with them. I think 57% of buyers already know kind of what they want to buy before they have a conversation. That's some data from LinkedIn. So young professionals, I think, are more in tune to how to leverage all the digital data out there. Now, with wealth managers, There could be, a 70-year-old wealth manager that was forced to use digital technology now because they can't be out at events, they can't get more customers from, doing the things that they used to. So now, LinkedIn and wealth management wasn't really a thing 5 years ago. Now it's almost a necessity for a lot of people who are trying to grow their book. So I would just leverage, as a young professional, your knowledge of these different technologies and really grow with how individuals are using it for sales and marketing to promote your own brand.
Yeah, and I know when I first met you guys and we were kind of discussing tonight, one point that you had made that I thought was really interesting was that idea of having the ability to research somebody before you met them. And I think that kind of goes along with, Jeff, what you were saying, to really leverage the information that's available to you. So I thought that was a really interesting point. Given some of the changes that you just talked about, the way that we've kind of seen social media evolve and these apps evolve, what do you guys think is coming next in the next 5 to 10 years? And do you have any expectations for that?
Metaverse. I'm actually happy to explain the metaverse. I'm going to do it in 30 seconds. Ready? Everybody thinks the metaverse is a bunch of people sitting on a couch with potato chip crumbs on their chest. It's not what the metaverse is. The metaverse, if anything, should make us more connected, not less connected. We started with desktops. Now we have mobile devices. I have 2 on me right now. But the hope is to remove this surface and be more integrated. So right now we have augmented reality, which is basically any filter you use on Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram. Do you have filters on LinkedIn?
No.
Not yet. And then there's virtual reality, and that's the entirely immersive version, right? You're in another world. The virtual reality will likely continue to be super immersive, but what's going to happen is augmented reality is going to augment our current reality. So if you're, for me, this is a relevant example, if you're at a soccer game watching your kids, everyone's standing there like this now, either not looking at their kids or taking pictures of their kids. The goal is that there should be some sort of device on you that can enable you to capture that moment without being removed from that moment. I think that's what the metaverse is going to look like. And a lot of what's going to happen in the metaverse is going to be based on your avatar. And your avatar is going to be an entirely different way of representing yourself. You're going to be able to do whatever you want with your avatar. We just announced this week that you can buy luxury designer avatar clothes. So if that's what you want to project about yourself in the metaverse, this is what it's going to be, but it's going to change the way I think people brand themselves and market. You could be a 600-pound gorilla, literally, in the avatar, in the metaverse, or you could have an avatar that looks exactly like yourself. So I think you're all too old for this already. But there are a number of faults where this is really natural, and I think we're going to be the ones that are going to have to figure out what it means to represent ourselves in the metaverse or in this new kind of virtual / augmented reality, which I think is going to be interesting to see, because it's going to happen professionally too. I think my largest clients are insurance carriers. I'm fully expecting insurance agents to have a full metaverse experience for selling life insurance. Instead of someone sitting at your kitchen table with you to sell you a life insurance policy, you're skydiving in the metaverse with your life insurance agent. Like, this is why you need life insurance. I think that's going to be the experience. It sounds ridiculous now, but that's the direction we're heading in. So that's where I think this conversation will be. I'm going to call it 7 years.
I don't think that's the trajectory that LinkedIn is on. But
I'm going to see you in the metaverse, man.
I just think, as a platform, LinkedIn is just getting more data from folks and asking for more data around products and services, and leveraging AI to connect buyers and sellers in a better fashion as we continue to evolve the platform. It's evolved from, I started in 2011, we were 80 million members, and now we're over 800 million. So it's still connecting the world's professionals, which is a great thing. I just think we're going to be able to leverage the amount of data that we have there to connect them in a better fashion.
And then just to close it out before we open up the floor for some questions, we talked a lot tonight about the idea of a personal brand and why it's important to build. If you guys could just kind of sum it up and I guess give a little bit of a definition to what a personal brand means to you, and if you have any examples of how you've leveraged your own personal brands in your careers.
For me, I think personal brand is really your own story. LinkedIn is, I think a lot of people would think of putting a resume on there when they first created a profile. But I think LinkedIn is the antithesis of that. It's really about telling your story, why you're in a specific industry, what value you can add to other people on the network, and the experiences that you're having that you can post about. And it could be a client experience, it could be information around the industry that you're in. But when you try to do business in this day and age, almost everybody is going to look at your LinkedIn profile before they answer that email, pick up the phone, call you back, buy a product or service from you. So, your personal brand is basically, like I said, your profile, your building block. You got to make sure that you invest time in that and create that full profile and actually invest time in promoting your brand and profile on that network.
I love that promotion part. I think that for me, this is just good, I think, career advice in general, but when you think about your career, a lot of it's managing them. It's making sure your boss and your boss's boss and your boss's boss knows what you're up to. And I think that building a brand in social is very similar. I had hoped that if I were to meet someone in real life that I know and in real life that they follow me on LinkedIn, they would know what I care about. And I think that that's a big part of the exercise. And it's actually really interesting. I was in the hallway at work the other day, and the head of North America, actually the head of all the Americas, Facebook walked by. We were standing in line for something, and I said hi to her and we were chatting for a few minutes, and she asked me if I knew the person standing next to her, and I did not. And she introduced me, and she told her what I was working on. The head of all of Americas for Facebook introduced me to this other person, told her what I was working on, told her the extracurricular thing I was working on, and then it just said my name. And I was like, she only knows that because I'm putting that out there. There's no other way for her to know that. There's like 1,500 people that report into her. But I'm active. I've spent the time connecting with her on LinkedIn, engaging with her content. I follow her on Instagram, she follows me back. She only knows what I'm working on because I'm telling her what I'm working on. I don't go over to her ever and tell her what I'm working on, but she sees it because it's out there, and that's part of the brand. And it enabled her to have that ability to tap in and go, actually know what Alice is up to. So I think it's very similar to managing up. You gotta be really concise about what you're working on. You have to have those bullet points down. It doesn't always have to be exactly right. You know what I mean by that? You have to. It's a story. You have to craft your story, and you have to get the details aren't always as important as kind of the entire tapestry effect. So pick the points of the details. This is what you get when you interview. Tell me about a time. It's you don't go into the whole stuff. You tell the interview version of the stuff, right? And I think that's the same thing with branding. It's get the tapestry effect correct. So when someone stops you on the street, they know what you're about.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I think that was a really great insight into building that brand and the importance of it. So at this time, I know there's a couple of you I can't see behind the column, but if anybody has any questions for our panelists, we're going to open up the floor at this time.
We'll pass around the microphone also, unless you want to project your voice, but I'm sure there's questions. So.
I can't verify it. Cannot. If I could, I would not announce it.
Questions? I'll start. Thank you for the discussion. This is great. I guess one thing that I would ask is, for anyone who is up and coming, right, in their 20s, early 30s, they've got a good 30 years ahead of them, right? If you think about it like that, what's your view on what things will look like in 20 years, other than what you mentioned about the metaverse, right? How do things evolve in terms of brand, networking,
do personal lunches still make a difference in 25 years, or does it not matter? Like, how do you think things evolve?
Personally, I mean, I love in-person meetings. I love in-person lunches. Being with clients is something that I think is a big part of my job. But I do think that these types of networks are going to continue to evolve. So you just have to continue to evolve with time. My profile from 2011 is much different than my profile now. I have a lot more on it. I have rich media, I have videos, I have no more bullet points underneath my work history. It's all storytelling of why I worked at a company and what I learned. So I just think you have to continue to keep up with the involvement of these platforms and continue to change. But I do think, as far as in business in general, in person, I hope it never goes away. I know after the pandemic, there's a good percentage of people are happy to do business without being in person. But for me personally, it's not something that I hope continues.
I totally agree. I think the impact of in-person meetings is huge. The thing that bothers me about digital meetings is they're very technical. There's all the interesting stuff happens in between, like on the way to the next meeting or at lunch, or that's where you learn about the person. That's where you learn about what motivates them. And I think the in-person stuff I hope doesn't go away. I think that what you said about the platforms evolving and you kind of evolving with them it makes a lot of sense. And I think that don't let your brand get stale. Right? Don't rest on your laurels. I had one tweet go viral 14 years ago. I'm the man. No, it's like that doesn't work, and people see through that. And just as savvy as you are, it's like kind of assessing someone's digital footprint. That's how savvy everybody is. It's just like an effect, so you have to kind of maintain that.
First of all, thank you very much for your insights. It's terrific. I guess my question is more directed towards LinkedIn. We saw Facebook make this kind of move from the era of posting with friends and keeping everything very segmented to now being able to have more of a reach. And I'm starting to see in my own personal feed the same sort of thing happening on LinkedIn, where people are posting resharing stories that might not be impactful to their brand or their personal image, but they're doing it because it gets comments or likes. So how does one navigate LinkedIn now and not be part of the oversaturation of published stories while continuing to post things that gain engagement or comments or likes?
Again, I think it's really about what you're trying to use the platform for. There's a great opportunity to continue to test out what works best for you. If you have interest and you're following the right people, you don't have to connect with people anymore. You can still follow them, which is a fairly new feature. And if you're using it for business, sometimes the flagship product isn't always the best product for you, right? Flagship products are really for networking, so if you're managing your own network correctly, you should only see the things that are really relevant to you. If you're using it for a book of business, we have other tools that you can use that kind of cancels out all the other noise, right? If you've been through 3 or 4 jobs, you have all your colleagues from the past companies, and they're posting things that maybe you don't really care about, you can kind of hide their posts, right, on flagship. So I think it's really about managing your network and how you want to use it. If you're using it for business, there's different things that can help you kind of cancel out the noise. And then just making sure if you want to quiet or put some of the posts, you can hide them, you don't have to see them. Did that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. This has been very informative. What would you say is the balance between marketing yourself on your profile as this business person, this brand that you said, versus marketing yourself in a way that is conducive to your brand and what you believe in, but more so encourages, like if you're someone that prefers to get to know someone over a phone call or face to face, and you don't necessarily know how to or feel very comfortable building this brand, this profile, that how do you communicate those pieces of yourself and your authenticity versus kind of like you said with this oversaturation and this typical business feed that we see?
I think that's a great question. I think the goal is to bridge them somehow. And I'll give you an example from my own career. There's like a range of company sizes represented in this room tonight. I work at a generalist company. We have these things called employee resource groups, where you can join them, and typically it's a place for folks that have similar life experiences, whether it's ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, whatever else it is, to join with them, right? And you can kind of find folks that are like you or allies that support you. So Facebook has an employee resource group, the Jewish community, and about a year ago, I became the global head of this Jewish community at Facebook. There's 2,000 members in it. And for a long time, I was just like supporting other people's causes. So I was an ally, part of the women at Facebook community, and I was a very present ally in that community and went to all the events and everything. But then I had this moment where I was like, well, I kind of want to do my thing too. And for a long time, I didn't post about it. And then, for whatever reason, I got comfortable with the idea of talking about that Jews at work on LinkedIn too. And it wasn't just about ad sales or whatever. And my audience really reacted to that because it broke through. It wasn't just more crap, right? It wasn't the same thing over and over again. It was different. But remember what I said before, is know your audience. So if I were to post about something about my Jewish identity on Facebook, would look very different than it would on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, it's about an experience I had at work or the community that I'm investing in our company, and why diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts matter in organizations, right? And I think that finding the balance and breaking through and being able to bridge them is really important. And people will get to know you that way. And people, I think, want that. People don't want just another PR type of thing. They want to see who they're connected with. They want to learn from it. That's the way the world's going, from my perspective. Is that connection?
Yeah, I think it's just about intent. So what the intent of your post is. If it's going to be something, more social, and you wanted to put it on Facebook and Instagram, that's great. But if the intent is in a business and you promote your business on Facebook and Instagram, then you can do similar things there. If the intent is to kind of brand yourself not only in the industry that you're in, but maybe for something else, just think about what the exact intent is. But it goes back to Alex's comment of being authentic. I think that's the most important part. I mean, there's a whole parody site on Instagram it's called Best of LinkedIn. People that just get called out for crazy posts. Made up Hit Monday, which is always a good one. So you just got to realize what your intent is, what platform you think it will do best. If it's going to do good on multiple platforms, and kind of overall like where your message is going to land. Yes.
Thank you. I'm glad there were some very brief comments about the differences between a mentor and a sponsor, but I wonder if maybe you could just elaborate a little bit, and in terms of advice for people who are young and early in their career, on perhaps how to identify one or the other and when to ask for the ask.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that back up. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of people go into mentorship relationships assuming everyone's going to be a sponsor. You get there and you're like, okay, now we've done the coffee thing like 3 times, like, why haven't I gotten a new job yet? It's like, what are you doing for me, kid? But I think that you're not going to ask the person, right? Because I don't think that it's not necessarily like, well, there's a great example episode where like George wants to get a mentor. Watch that. That's typically not how it works. I think the way it works is that you have to feel it out, and you have to you get to know someone, and you start to understand the type of language they use and the type of conversations they want to have, and they're asking you about your aspirations, and then the next conversation they're asking you about how your day was and what your goals are and stuff like that. They're probably talking more mentor stuff. If they're being really tactical and asking you where you see yourself in 3 years and how you're going to get there, and if they offer to make introductions for you, that's typically a good sense that they're going to be a sponsor. And they actually send the introduction. It's also a good sense they're going to be a sponsor. Sometimes mentors say they're going to do it and they don't. Mentors are great. They're very important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say one's more important than the other. The mentor is the person you call. I'll give you a perfect example. The mentor is the person you call when you have a really good call with a recruiter, but you're just not sure about it. And the mentor knows where you're at in your career. They've heard you talk about it before, and they're going to give you some advice about how that call went, how to kind of proceed. The sponsor is the person you call when you want the next job and you haven't spoken to the recruiter yet, because you know that person's going to do something on your behalf or they're in a position to help. And those people can change. Your mentors and your sponsors will change over time. The idea that you're going to have one mentor or sponsor your entire career is very limiting and also not realistic. You'll either get bored of each other, or you will have another set of focuses, or you'll switch industries, or you'll find someone more interesting, more compelling, or they will find someone more interesting, more compelling. And I think that you have to be open to that. So I think one thing that a mistake I may have made early in my career is thinking that if a mentorship or a sponsorship relationship had come to an end, that I had failed that relationship in some way, that I had lost access to this person. But there are other mentors in the city, and just gotta get that together. And I think that's coming to events like this is a good way to do that. But yeah, it takes time. I think that comes back to the patience things too, is understanding the role that this person's going to play in your career.
I think that's a great classification. The one thing I would add is just, as you're looking at these individuals, if it's sponsorship or if it's a mentor, it's a self-awareness thing for yourself. Where are these gaps that you feel like these individuals can help you with? And, what are some of the things that you admire about this person when you watch them, either do business or in their personal activities? So I would just try to have some self-awareness, understand where you could use some help in certain areas, and find people that can deliver in those areas.
Also, keep track. We're going to answer the question back in a moment. Just keep track of the things that you like and that you don't like that your mentor does, because you're going to be that person one day, and don't drive that next person crazy. And that's a big learning for me in my career.
I really like that introduction of the metaverse. I actually have an Oculus VR headset at home. I have it for a while, but last week I realized they're having some new features. For example, you can actually do a virtual recruiting or a networking event. All you need to do is to put on a VR headset, walk to the employer who also have the VR headset on, and you can have a conversation starting from there. So that really raised the question how we should think about, the competitive landscape of the technology companies, right? So traditionally, when we think about recruiting or networking, we think about linking, of course. But more and more people are doing the other way around. A lot of my friends are using LinkedIn as their Instagram. It's kind of annoying at this point, but it's an inevitable trend. So I guess my question is, when you go approach a client and prepare for a pitch, how do you think about the competitive landscape, which is, ever changing in the tech sector, and what is the best way to get, prepared for this landscape?
Sure. Yeah. Do you want to go?
There's so much information out there right now. Obviously it's not all on LinkedIn, and you can Google companies, you can Google anything that you want to basically have several layers of information. I think where LinkedIn is good is you're going to get the most up-to-date information on individuals and companies. For me, I tried to get away of never having that check-in email or checking in phone call. I have updates almost every single hour from an individual or a company that I can bring to the table that shows that I've done my research, and that my prospect or customer will understand that I know where they're at specifically at that space and time. And then, if I'm looking at challenges, through their financial reports or things of those natures, that's really where I think companies will put that out there. But then for the now, I will look at LinkedIn and say, okay, here's a good tidbit of information that I can lead with in an email or phone call.
I also use LinkedIn heavily for that. Google Alerts, if you're like in a client-facing role, set Google Alerts for your clients and you'll get a notification if they're in the news. The worst, this is something I never understand. Salespeople will walk into a meeting with a client and they won't just like quickly Google them before the meeting to see if there was like some breaking news 5 hours before. It's like, oh, like imagine like you walk into a meeting and you didn't know the client you're about to talk to was filed in bankruptcy. Like there's no way you would have known that if you hadn't looked them up 30 seconds before. But at the same time, you can't know everything, and you have to be vulnerable to that. So, like, admitting that you don't know the latest trend or you're not ahead is okay. I do it all the time. Like, I can't possibly keep up with every product that Meta comes out with. It's just company just stupid at this point. And so people will be like, "What do you think about?" I haven't even heard of that. And it's like it's okay to admit that, and I'm gonna have more information next time you meet, and I'll get back to you. So I think that's a big part of understanding the landscape too, is recognizing that it might change faster than keep up.
Thank you, that's helpful.